Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
Over the weekend, the world saw the Assad regime topple in Syria after rebels took control of Damascus. This has been described as a shock offensive, especially with just how quickly the regime fell after it has been in power for over half a century. So, Jonathan, to start off the conversation, could you give us the 30,000-foot view here? How did we get to this point?
Yes, I don't think it was in many people's bingo cards that the Syrian regime would fall as fast as it did and with as little resistance. They basically didn't put up a fight, and the rebels just drove through city after city. They started in the north, in Aleppo, and then Idlib, and then Hama, and then Homs, and then they were at the outskirts of Damascus, and then it was done. And the military, the Syrian military, just disintegrated. I think that the die was cast once Assad flew to Russia, and he came back understanding that he wouldn't be getting any substantial Russian support. And once he tried to reach out to multiple countries, including to Israel reportedly, but multiple other natural allies of Syria, of course, the Iranians and other countries begging for help, nobody wanted to. Then I think he understood, and his military understood, that this was game over, and the military started to retreat and disintegrate. That is probably the main reason why it happened so fast, and I must say, very surprisingly. I don't think that any Western intel organization really knew and assessed that it would be such a free fall and it would take so little time. Now we are in a totally different Middle East with lots of options, lots of opportunities for the West, and quite a few threats.
So let's talk about this totally different landscape in the Middle East, because the military in Syria, as you said, completely disintegrated as the rebels drove through. Assad has fled, so now who is in charge of Syria?
So, what's interesting, very interesting this time, usually revolutions, they are usually bloody and violent. What we're seeing out of Syria currently, I think, the rebels are working really hard to try for there to be a semblance of an orderly passage of control of the country, which I think is very interesting. There are no mass executions. They've just notified, I read, that they are going to pardon the active members of the Syrian military, that they're not looking to, start executing people. And they've also issued guidance to their fighters. The rebels have issued guidance to their soldiers and rank and file not to be violent against minorities, Christians and Druze and Kurds and others. So there's interesting things that are happening, which I think are relatively positive. Who's in charge? The main man is the leader of an organization called HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Front for the Liberation of Syria. They are a Turkish-supported US-designated terror organization, which is kind of awkward and inconvenient because now the US has to reevaluate if that definition stands. He's in charge, and he is leading the transition. He has so far kept in position current Syrian government ranking members, and he wants them to kind of do the transition in a smooth delivery of power. And it'll be very interesting to see what they will say the future will be. If they're going to call elections, which is a very remote possibility, but that could be a pleasant surprise, or if they're going to say, now we are in power and we are going to implement Sharia, strict Muslim law. I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the people, the rebels, most, if not all, are Sunni jihadists. Their outlook on life is a very strict and radical interpretation of Islam. These are not freedom fighters in the democratic sense, but these are people who believe that the only way to live is by the Quran and a very strict interpretation of it. But we'll see how that meets reality, and it's very sensitive days now in Syria.
The AP reported back in May of 2023 that HTS and this leader wanted to move to a more moderate way. What does Syria look like under his rule going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Syria, when we scroll back in history and we remember how Syria was founded, Damascus has a long history. Aleppo has a long history as city states, but the nation of Syria was basically something that came into effect when the French and the British in 1917 carved up the Ottoman Empire after the First World War. And they decided that, well, this country here, this family, was going to be given a country, and it's going to be called Syria. And that's how Syria came into being in 1946. Why does that matter? Because for so many years, this nation state has basically cobbled together many very diverse ethnic minorities. You have ethnic Kurds in the northeast, you have Druze in the southwest, you have Sunnis and many other groups scattered all over. You have Alawites in the western coastal part. There are many different ethnic groups. And I speak of this ethnic composure because I think that there's a very big chance that we're going to see the map and the boundaries of Syria redrawn. I think that there's a chance to see a Kurdish autonomy in the northeastern part, and maybe other areas that will break away from the Syrian country as we have become accustomed to it for the last 70 or almost 80 years. I think this can go many ways. Will the new masters of Syria decide to keep the boundaries and to preserve the Syrian nation state, or will they perhaps try to expand? One thing that I, as an Israeli, am very mindful of is what is Turkey going to do from the north? I think Turkey has very imperialistic designs and aspirations. Maybe they are trying to relive and revive the days of the Ottoman Empire. Maybe we will see a Turkish land grab in northern Syria. That's something that could definitely escalate the situation. But I think that, in 5 years from now, my guess is that the map of Syria will look differently, not only facts on the ground, but actually the way that we will be delineating the maps in the atlas, and it will look different from how it looks now.
So let's dive into that a little deeper here, because major players in this conflict obviously are Turkey and Iran. How does this change the power structure of the Middle East?
So I think that it's a very bad week for the Iranian regime, for the Russian Federation, for Hezbollah, and for the allies of this axis of evil that exists in the Middle East. It's not a good week for them, very bad. They have lost, this strategic investment. The Russians and the Iranians, each from their own side and from their own objectives, have invested years and trillions of dollars into propping up the Assad regime. They fought and defended the regime from 2011 when the first Syrian war erupted, and they were absolutely instrumental in keeping Assad in place during those years, and now that is lost. What this means for the Middle East is that there's a chance of a very much weakened Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon. Why so? Because they are absolutely dependent on the delivery of weapons and money and personnel from Iran via Syria into Lebanon. Now, if Syria isn't the same highway of weapons that it used to be, and if they won't be able to travel there, then Hezbollah in Lebanon is weakened. What does that mean for Lebanon? It could mean that other parts of the Lebanese society, Sunnis and Christians and Druze, may rise up and say, we want to reclaim Lebanon. We want Lebanon to be Lebanese, and we don't want these foreign Iranian meddling in our affairs. And that may be something that we will see in the coming months and year ahead. Something that I think we should all be very concerned about is the stability of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. They are under tremendous jihadi and Palestinian pressure to begin with. And we know that when there's chaos and anarchy in one area, in a neighbor state, that has a tendency to spill over. And it may happen in Jordan. If it does, that could be a major disruptor of regional order, and that could open up a whole Pandora's box of trouble for the West, for the US, for Israel, and for other countries. I think I'm so far impressed with the Jordanian security forces' capacity to defend themselves, but they are under quite a lot of pressure, and we'll be monitoring that quickly. And last thing that I'd say is the proliferation of chemical and strategic weapons. What's happening in Syria now is that the regime fell. The Syrian regime had lots and lots of chemical and very lethal weapons that are on the top wish list of almost all of the terrorists around the world. Surface-to-air missiles and long-range missiles and anti-tank missiles and chemical weapons. What Israel has been doing over the last 24 hours is basically the heavy lifting for the world and taking out those weapons so that they don't fall in the hands of terrorists and don't make it to the free black market of terrorists around the world. Israel is doing it out of an Israeli incentive to keep ourselves safe, but I think it's very important that these weapons that were already in very wrong hands of the Syrian regime don't circulate on the market and find themselves being fired at, commercial airliners around the world, for example.
It sounds like from what you're saying, we're at a real inflection point, and there are a lot of moving pieces throughout the Middle East we need to be cognizant of. But as Assad's regime fell on Saturday, I want to read what you posted, and if we could dive a little deeper there. You wrote this, quote, "The irony. Hamas, by launching the massacre on Israel on October 7th, started the chain reaction that led to Assad's fall. They thought Israel would crumble and fall, but it's the Iranian dominoes that are falling, and this isn't the end of that chain reaction." So, A, what is Iran thinking right now? And B, what do you think the end of that chain reaction is?
The end of that chain reaction is the fall of the Iranian regime. That is where that chain reaction will end. I don't know how long it will take. And I know that it'll take a lot of effort to get there for the Iranian people to rise up against the Iranian regime. But I know that there is tremendous energy behind that. And I know that there is tremendous resentment and hatred by the Iranian people against the oppressive Iranian regime. And I think that the Iranian strategy, you asked what the Iranians are thinking now, they are in damage assessment and damage control mode. They're trying to stem the tide here. From an Iranian perspective, when we zoom out and look at the last 14 months, I think that they were pretty happy with reality on October the 7th. And for the main months after October the 7th, they were seeing Israel suffer, bogged down in a war in Gaza, and they were seeing two of their proxies attack Israel directly, and another proxy, the Houthis in Yemen, doing the same. And I think that they thought that they were quite on a roll. Now, 14 months after, Hamas destroyed and without military capabilities, Hezbollah disabled, and Syria no longer a puppet in their ring of fire around Israel, is not a good situation for the Iranians. And I'm quite sure that they're feeling a very strange tingling of fear for their own regime when it comes to what's going on in Iran. So where this will go from now, I think it presents the West, it presents Saudi Arabia, Israel, the US, and other more moderate countries in the region with an opportunity to apply pressure on the Iranian regime, to limit their ability to continue to spread weapons and violence and terror in the region, and to roll back that regime and to help the Iranian people rise up against it. That is really what the fall of Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime means on a regional level. And I think that this is the beginning of a good opportunity. Hopefully, in a few years, we will see a totally different Middle East that is focused on prosperity, on peace, on building bridges between different countries and on working together, not on terrorism, not on fighting, and where we won't have news from the Middle East of suffering people and destruction, but about creativity and good things.
At the beginning of this conversation, you said it is a bad day for Iran. You just said you think that that regime will topple. You just don't know when. When you're looking at when, can you pinpoint a little bit? Would that be days, weeks, months, years? Is there any ballpark there?
So very difficult to assess. I don't think that anybody gave a correct assessment before the Berlin Wall came tumbling down or the Soviet empire crumbled. Usually you know it in hindsight and you can barely recognize it when it's happening. What I can say is this. I think that it is within the interest of freedom-loving countries, democracies, to pursue a strategy of maximum pressure on the Iranian regime, to apply pressure across the board, militarily, economically, with sanctions, and diplomatically and politically and information-wise, all across the board. There needs to be pressure on the Iranian regime until the Iranian people can get their political act together and stand up against the regime. And I think, if anything shows, we can learn from the example in Syria, it didn't take a lot. I mean, this round, it didn't take a lot. They were basically, jihadi fighters with small rifles, small arms on pickup trucks, and they just routed the Syrian military because it was hollow and it was disintegrated. I don't think that the Iranian regime is as weak. I think that they have stronger institutions, they have better finances, and they are not as weak as Assad was. But I don't think that they are as strong as they think they are, or that they want people to perceive that they are. And I think that it is only a matter of time before this evil regime eventually is relegated to the dustbin of history. It'll take months or years. I think that in the coming years, there will be a window of opportunity for Israel, for the United States, for Saudi Arabia, for other countries to actually invest time and resources in helping the Iranian people rise up.
As you're saying, we're really on a precipice right now, and there's a lot that remains to be seen in the Middle East. So what specifically are you looking out for next?
I am looking out for, first of all, to make sure that there's not chaos and anarchy in Syria that may spill over into Israel. Israel has taken a few preemptive measures to safeguard itself and its population, and so far that's working. I think Jordan is very important to be protected and safeguarded, and I would hope that there would be American words of warning towards Turkey, which is a NATO member, and hopefully impress upon the Turkish leadership that now is definitely not the time for any imperial adventures, and not to make any land grabs into Syria. That, I think, is very important in order to preserve. And I think President Biden yesterday today said very good things to help the new Syrian leadership go towards the path of civil rights and human rights, and to have a smooth transition of power. Hopefully in the future, maybe dare we say the word democracy, even though it's a very big word and it doesn't have a lot of success in the Middle East, but maybe towards something that is closer towards rule of law, democracy, civil rights, human rights. That would be a good thing. And to try to avoid a bloodbath that could be a result of the transition of power here. It's a very sensitive situation, and I think we are definitely not out of the woods yet. There are pockets of loyalist areas in Syria that I think the rebels still haven't gotten to, and once they will get there, the coastal areas and other places, we may see lots of violence. I am concerned about the fate of minorities in Syria, Christians, Druze, Alawites, and Kurds, and because the track record is not a good one when it comes to Sunni jihadists and terrorists. When they take over territory, that usually doesn't end well for Christians, and I hope that this time will be different. And I'll end on a positive note. I saw an interview on Israeli TV by one of the commanders of the Syrian rebel forces on the Syrian Golan Heights, and his message towards Israel was one about love. Yes, he said the word love, support, freedom, investment, prosperity, and really extending a hand towards Israel. And that's exactly what I think should be the focus. And I think that there's a good chance here for good things to happen in Syria. It's probably going to be better in Syria than it was under a very cruel dictator that was propped up by other dictators, by Russia and Iran. And maybe if history smiles on the people of Syria, we'll see a prosperous, free, and more human rights oriented country in the future. I know that my country, Israel, would want to see that. And if there's ever a chance or an opportunity to build bridges of peace, coexistence based on mutual respect, and to help the Syrian people by investment and economy and doing the things that Israel is very good at, then I'm sure that Israel will be all over that opportunity to build a better future for the region, for ourselves, and for Syria.
Well, Jonathan, this is certainly a developing situation, and as we have future conversations, I hope you can come back on and join me and break it down. Thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
I would be delighted to do so, and I look forward to it. Thank you.